All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You know, sometimes you hear something and you just got to get to the bottom of it. That's what we do here, right?
Hmm.
And today, well, today we're diving into this thing, the Latitude Society. You've probably seen it floating around, especially online. It's a conspiracy theory, but like all good conspiracy theories, there's that little grain of what if that makes you want to learn more.
It really is fascinating, and it's interesting to see how, even though this Latitude Society idea is relatively new, it still draws on those really old conspiracy theory themes, like a global elite pulling the strings, a new world order, stuff that's been around forever, really.
Yeah, it's like they took the classic conspiracy playbook and just gave it a digital makeover.
Yes.
So what makes the Latitude Society stand out from the crowd of others' theories?
Well, for one thing, it seems to have sprung up entirely online, which is pretty unusual. A lot of the chatter about it comes from those QAnon communities.
Ah, QAnon, a whole other rabbit hole we could jump down, right? But it just goes to show how quickly these things can take off on the internet.
Yeah, it's like the internet is almost a perfect breeding ground for these kinds of theories. It's so easy for people to find others who think the same way.
Right. Like echo chambers almost.
Exactly. Echo chambers. It's where everyone's reinforcing everyone else's beliefs, even if they're not necessarily based on solid evidence. You don't get a lot of different perspectives in those spaces.
Okay, so we have this theory, this shadowy Latitude Society with maybe global ambitions born on the internet. But who are these supposed members? Who are we talking about here?
Well, the theories point to this pretty powerful group of people. We're talking politicians, big tech CEOs, maybe even a few celebrities thrown in for good measure.
So people who are already in positions of power and influence. The usual suspects, basically.
Right. It fits that classic idea that there's this secret network operating behind the scenes.
The idea that things aren't what they seem, that the real power lies in the shadows.
Exactly. And of course, they're supposedly pulling strings to benefit themselves, at everyone else's expense.
A classic power grab, huh? But what's their end game? What are they trying to achieve with all this supposed control?
Well, the theories usually point to a new world order, a world where individual liberties are crushed and information is tightly controlled, that kind of thing.
So not just controlling resources or governments, but literally controlling what people think.
Yeah, it's a pretty common theme in conspiracy theories, this idea of controlling thoughts and perceptions.
Okay, so we have a group, we have a motive,
Uh-huh.
but what about proof? What evidence do people point to when they talk about the Latitude Society? Because that's where things get interesting,
Well,
right?
that's the thing. A lot of the evidence is circumstantial,
Yeah.
Speculation events that are maybe taken out of context, like they're connecting dots, but with very few dots and a lot of assumptions about where the line should go.
So it's like you see two powerful people at the same party, and
Mm.
suddenly it's proof they're secretly plotting to take over the world.
Right. And the fact that there's no clear, undeniable proof, well, for some people, that just reinforces the idea that there's a cover-up.
The absence of evidence becomes evidence itself. That's a classic conspiracy theory tactic.
It makes it really tricky to talk about these things because you're not just debating facts, you're debating entire worldviews.
And those worldviews are often built on a foundation of distrust. Distrust of institutions, distrust of those in power, the assumption that someone, somewhere, is always pulling the strings.
And that distrust, well, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. There are real problems in the world, real inequalities, systems that sometimes feel rigged against the average person.
Right, so it's not like these anxieties come from a vacuum. Okay, so we've got the distrust, the shadowy figures, this web of possibly connected events. But why latitude? What's with that name?
That's a good question. Some people think latitude refers to actual places, like geographical locations where these powerful figures meet.
So like specific lines of latitude have some secret meaning.
Maybe. Others say latitude is more symbolic. It's about freedom, like these people operate above the rules, they have unlimited reach.
So the name itself adds to the mystery. It allows for different interpretations, which keeps the speculation going.
That's what makes these theories so interesting to study. They often tell us more about the people who believe them than about any real conspiracy.
That's a good point. We're not here to say whether the Latitude Society is real or not. We just want to understand it, understand why people are drawn to it, and what that tells us about the world we live in.
Right. It's about exploring ideas, trying to understand why some narratives take hold and others don't. That's what makes these deep dives so interesting. You never know what connections you'll uncover. And that's what makes these deep dives so engaging. You never know what connections you'll uncover.
You're right about that. Speaking of connections, as we've been discussing this Latitude Society, it strikes me that this theory isn't happening in a vacuum. It shares some striking similarities with other conspiracy theories out there, like they're all part of the same family tree of ideas.
That's a keen observation. There's definitely a pattern of shared themes and anxieties running through many of these narratives.
So, how would you say the Latitude Society fits into this broader landscape of conspiracy theories?
Like many others, it taps into this deep-seated distrust of authority, whether it's the government, the media, big corporations, or even scientific experts. There's this underlying suspicion that those in power are not what they seem.
Right, that classic us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And the Latitude Society narrative provides this convenient scapegoat for all sorts of complex issues: economic inequality, political corruption, global pandemics, you name it. It's like they've become this catch-all villain, an easy explanation for anything people find unsettling or confusing.
Makes you wonder if it's more about the need for a villain, rather than a genuine search for the truth.
That's an excellent point. Remember, conspiracy theories often thrive in times of uncertainty and rapid change, when people are looking for explanations for someone to blame. The Latitude Society narrative offers a simple, yet often compelling answer.
Okay, so we're seeing how this theory taps into broader anxieties. But let's zoom back in on the Latitude Society specifically. One thing I've been pondering is the role of technology in all of this.
Hmm.
It seems to play a double role, not just in how the theory spreads, but also as part of the theory itself.
That's a really insightful observation. You're right. The internet has been a game changer for conspiracy theories. It allows these ideas to spread like wildfire, connecting like-minded individuals who might never have found each other otherwise.
It's like the digital equivalent of passing secret notes in class, except on a global scale.
And as we mentioned earlier, these online spaces can quickly become echo chambers where information is selectively shared and dissenting voices are often silenced or drowned out.
It creates this perfect storm for misinformation to flourish.
But what's even more fascinating is how the Latitude Society theory itself incorporates technology into its narrative. They're often portrayed as this technologically advanced group, using sophisticated tools for surveillance, manipulation, and control.
It's like they've taken on this almost sci-fi villain role, using futuristic technology for nefarious purposes.
Precisely. And this reflects a growing anxiety about the role of technology in our lives. Think about it. We're becoming increasingly reliant on smartphones, social media, artificial intelligence. It's natural to wonder if these tools could be used against us, to manipulate our thoughts and behaviors.
It's like that classic fear of the machine, except now the machine is something we willingly carry in our pockets.
Exactly. And this fear is often amplified by the fact that technology is evolving so rapidly, it can feel like we're losing control, being swept up in a tide of change that we don't fully understand.
So the Latitude Society, whether real or imagined, becomes a focal point for these anxieties about technology. It gives a face, a name to this fear of the unknown.
And that's something I think our listeners can really connect with, this feeling of being overwhelmed by the pace of technological change, the sense that things are happening faster than we can process them.
It's like we're all passengers on this high-speed train,
Yeah.
and we're not sure who's driving.
But it's important to remember that not all technological advancements are inherently bad. Technology can be a powerful tool for good, for connecting people, sharing information, and solving problems.
Right. It's all about how we use it and how we ensure that it's used ethically and responsibly.
That's a crucial point, and one that often gets lost in these discussions about conspiracy theories. It's easy to get caught up in the fear and paranoia, but we shouldn't let that blind us to the potential benefits of technology.
It's all about finding that balance between embracing innovation and being critical of its potential downsides.
And having open and honest conversations about these issues is key.
Speaking of open and honest conversations,
Well,
I'm curious to get your take on something. We've talked about the Latitude Society tapping into distrust of authority, but isn't there a bit of a contradiction there? I mean, believing in a grand conspiracy like this requires a certain level of faith, almost like a belief in a hidden order controlling everything.
that's a really thought-provoking question, and it highlights a fascinating paradox at the heart of many conspiracy theories.
Because on the one hand, you have this deep distrust of official narratives. But on the other hand, you're putting your faith in an alternative narrative
Yeah.
that might be just as unverifiable.
It's like trading one set of beliefs for another.
And for some people, that alternative narrative, no matter how outlandish it might seem, provides a sense of comfort, a feeling of knowing something that others don't.
It's like belonging to an exclusive club, a group of people who are in the know.
And that sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than yourself, can be incredibly powerful.
Especially in a world that can often feel isolating and alienating.
So in a way, the Latitude Society theory, and others like it, offer not just an explanation for the world's complexities, but also a sense of community and purpose.
It's a fascinating psychological phenomenon, and one that speaks to a deep human need for connection and meaning.
It's interesting to think about all the different factors that contribute to the appeal of conspiracy theories.
It's a complex interplay of psychological, social, and cultural forces.
And the Latitude Society, with its blend of classic tropes, modern anxieties, and online origins, provides a perfect case study for understanding these forces.
Absolutely. It's a window into the collective psyche of our times.
And as we continue to navigate this increasingly complex world, it's more important than ever to be aware of these forces, to understand how they shape our beliefs, and to engage in critical thinking and open dialogue.
That's the key to navigating the information landscape and making informed decisions about what to believe.
Well said. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into the Latitude Society, there's one more aspect I'd like to explore, and it's something we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
The psychological comfort that some people might find in these narratives.
Yes. The allure of simple explanations in a complex world.
Because let's face it, the world can be a pretty scary place sometimes.
It certainly can.
We're bombarded with news about conflicts, economic crises, climate change. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless.
And in those moments of uncertainty, it can be tempting to latch onto an explanation that offers a sense of order and control.
Even if that explanation is ultimately unfounded.
Exactly. Conspiracy theories, like the Latitude Society narrative, provide a framework for understanding events that might otherwise feel random or chaotic.
It's like saying, okay, there's this group pulling the strings. It's not just random chaos, there's a plan, even if it's a nefarious one.
It's a way of making sense of the world, even if it's a distorted sense.
And that sense of understanding, even if it's based on a false premise, can provide a certain level of psychological comfort.
It can reduce anxiety, offer a sense of purpose, and even create a feeling of belonging to a community of like-minded individuals.
So it's not just about believing in the conspiracy itself, but about the psychological benefits that believing in the conspiracy provides.
It's a coping mechanism, a way of dealing with the anxieties and uncertainties of modern life.
And that's something I think we all can relate to. On some level, we all have our ways of coping with stress and uncertainty.
Absolutely. It's part of the human experience.
But it's important to be aware of these coping mechanisms and to ensure that they're not leading us down a path of misinformation and delusion.
That's where critical thinking and open dialogue come in.
It's fascinating to think about the psychology behind all of this. It really adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of the Latitude Society.
It's a reminder that we're all susceptible to these kinds of beliefs, especially when we're feeling vulnerable or uncertain.
It's a humbling thought, but also an important one.
It encourages us to be more compassionate and understanding, even when we disagree with someone's beliefs.
And to be more critical of our own beliefs as well.
Exactly. We all have our biases and preconceived notions.
It's about being aware of those biases and being willing to challenge them.
That's the foundation of critical thinking.
And critical thinking is more important than ever in this age of information overload.
Absolutely. We're constantly bombarded with information from all directions. It's up to us to filter through the noise and make informed decisions about what to believe.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. The next time you encounter a conspiracy theory, whether it's about the Latitude Society or something else entirely, take a moment to consider the psychology behind it. Why might people be drawn to this particular narrative? What anxieties or desires might it be tapping into?
It's a great exercise in critical thinking, and it can help us to better understand the world around us.
And ourselves as well.
Exactly. It's all about self-reflection.
Yeah.
And a willingness to question our own assumptions.
Well said. All right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been spending some time with this Latitude Society theory, this idea of a shadowy group, kind of secretly running the world.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. We've unpacked what people believe about it, the so-called evidence, and why this kind of narrative might appeal to people on a psychological level.
It really gets you thinking about how, as humans, we try to understand a world that often feels, random or out of control.
That's a big part of what makes conspiracy theories tick, right? That desire for a simple explanation, a way to find order when things seem complex.
And the Latitude Society theory does that.
Mm-hmm.
Gives you this neat and tidy story, bad guys, a master plan, all that.
It's like a puzzle where all the pieces seem to fit perfectly, even if the image it creates is kind of, disturbing.
But that's the thing about puzzles. They're meant to have a solution.
Hmm.
Conspiracy theories, they often raise more questions than answers.
Exactly. And that's where thinking critically comes in. You got to be willing to look at the pieces of the puzzle, see if they really fit, and be open to other explanations?
Because sometimes the story that sounds the best, the most convincing, isn't actually true.
That's really important to keep in mind, especially these days. We're constantly bombarded with information.
It's like we're drowning in it. Hard to know what to believe.
We have to get better at thinking critically, figuring out fact from fiction, really looking at where our information's coming from.
All right, so before we wrap up this deep dive into the Latitude Society, I want to come back to something we touched on earlier. The idea that even if the theory itself is far-fetched, it might still reflect some real anxieties people have about, I don't know, power, control, the way the world's changing so fast.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We need to recognize those anxieties, even if we don't buy into every detail of the theory itself.
Because just dismissing people's concerns doesn't get us anywhere.
It's about understanding where they're coming from, having a real conversation respectfully.
So what do you think? Are those anxieties about power and control justified? Or are they just, people letting their imaginations run wild?
That's a tough one. I don't think there's a simple answer. There are real issues with how power is concentrated, whether it's governments, corporations, even just individuals with a lot of influence.
And technology changing so fast, it can be exciting, but also kind of scary.
It makes sense that people feel unsettled, the world transforming right before our eyes.
So maybe the Latitude Society theory, whether it's true or not, is a kind of reminder to be aware, to question authority, to really think about who's shaping our lives and how.
It's a call to action, to get involved, to make sure we're in control of our own future.
Because ultimately, our future isn't in the hands of some shadowy group. It's up to us, the choices we make, what we do.
That's something worth remembering.
As we try to figure out this crazy 21st century, it's easy to feel powerless, like we're just along for the ride.
But when we think critically, when we challenge what we assume to be true, when we listen to different points of view, we can make our own choices. We can create a future we believe in.
So here's a thought to leave you with. The next time you come across a conspiracy theory, whether it's about the Latitude Society or anything else, think about the psychology behind it. What anxieties or desires might be fueling it? Why are people drawn to that particular story?
It's a great way to practice thinking critically, and it helps us understand the world and ourselves a little bit better.
Well said. We got to leave it there for today. But thanks for joining us on a deep dive. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something that's got us curious. Until then, keep those minds open and keep asking questions.